Please subscribe to me.
This case takes place in the USA in the year 1984. At around 11 p.m. on the 4th of May, 3 teenagers were driving along Old Line Road. It's a rural gravel road in Vernon County, Wisconsin, several miles west of the town of Westby, somewhere littered with farm fields and widely spaced homes. It was not a road that saw much movement at night, which made anything unusual along the roadside stand out immediately. As they drove, the headlights of the vehicle picked up a shape lying on the edge of the road. At first, it was difficult to understand what it was, as they were some distance. But as they got closer and the car slowed, the shape of an adult woman began to form. This woman remained motionless as the vehicle approached. There was no visible sign that she was alive. The teenagers were apprehensive, so they didn't approach the body. They didn't touch her. They didn't search her clothing or look through the area for any identifying belongings. Instead, they chose to leave the scene immediately and get help as quickly as possible. They drove to a nearby farmhouse and asked them for some assistance. From there, they contacted the authorities to report what they had found. The location of the body itself offered no immediate explanation. Old Line Road was not a place where pedestrians were commonly seen, particularly after dark. There were no nearby businesses, no gathering places, and no obvious destination that would put a lone woman on that stretch of road at night. The teenagers explained to the police that they had no idea who she was, how she came to be there, or how long she had been on the roadside before they arrived. The police soon arrived on the scene, and they approached the body, and what they found was unbelievably disturbing. Her face had been totally caved in. The woman was described as white and was around 50 to 65 years old. She was around 5 feet and 5 inches tall and weighed around 150 pounds. She had no tattoos, no visible birthmarks, and she was wearing no jewelry. She wore a black dress with a blue and white pattern, and under the dress she wore a white-blue turtleneck-style top. She was wearing nylon stockings, a 3/4 length coat, and brown slip-on shoes. Now, this is all worth mentioning, as strangely, investigators noted that the clothing labels had been removed from all of her garments, limiting the ability to trace where the items were purchased or made, meaning that someone, somewhere, had done this deliberately, knowing full well that it would be difficult to trace her with these removed. She had no wallet, no purse, and no personal effects were reported as being found with her. In her mouth, examiners found full upper and lower dentures, and they noted that she had no natural teeth. Evidence was gathered at the scene, and following this, an autopsy was conducted to try and determine her cause of death. The autopsy concluded that she had died as a result of severe blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries described were extensive and centered around the head and face. Her skull had severe fractures. One eye socket was completely shattered, and her jaw was broken in multiple locations. A sharp force wound was also documented near the left side of her head, close to her ear, though the specific weapon could not be identified. During the attack, her dentures were dislodged and damaged. Fragments were missing from one of the plates. But the brutality and violence that this woman experienced in her final moments did not end there. The woman's hands had been severed at the wrists. The police began searching all the surrounding areas for her hands. However, they were never recovered, not even to this day. The severing of her hands was determined to have been done with a sharp implement, but again, they couldn't tell exactly what it was, and the timing of the severing relative to the death could not be conclusively established, but it was believed that it was likely shortly before she was killed. Any defensive injuries could not be conclusively asserted, as her hands were missing. No evidence of SA was documented in the autopsy findings. Based on the conditions of the woman's body and the forensic indicators available at the time, death was estimated to have occurred within approximately 1 to 2 days prior to discovery. The sheer brutality of the crime left many investigators disturbed. They were dealing with a truly depraved killer. The removal of the woman's hands was interpreted as a deliberate act intended to prevent identification through fingerprints. Whoever had done this really didn't want this person to be identified, and they went through extreme measures to prevent it. They noted that the amount of blood present at the discovery site did not appear to be consistent with the severity of the head injuries, nor the amount of blood loss normally caused by cutting off both hands. This meant that the assault took place elsewhere, and the body was later moved and dumped to that location. As publicity spread, investigators received information from a married couple who reported a suspicious encounter from that very same night. They stated that they had seen a man near a yellow two-door compact car along US Highway 14 near Old Line Road earlier in the evening. The man reportedly appeared startled when the couple passed, and he quickly re-entered his vehicle and fled the scene. Now, they thought this was strange, but they didn't think too much of it at the time. But, of course, as news of the body spread, they realized that they may have seen the killer. The couple felt like they had no choice and quickly went to the police, and they took investigators to that exact spot. When investigators arrived at the scene, they noticed tire tracks consistent with a hasty U-turn. They also discovered several items from that location of interest to the case. This included a fragment of a denture, and a man's wristwatch was also found. The denture fragment was later confirmed to be consistent with the damaged denture worn by the victim. Taken together, these findings suggested that the couple had indeed seen the killer, and they had seen him attempting to dispose of the body. With this, the police got to work right away. The couple were adamant that the killer's car was yellow, a 1980s Datsun. Investigators began the grueling task of tracking down the vehicle. Despite efforts to identify the yellow car and its driver, investigators were unable to locate the suspect matching the description. While those leads were being pursued, investigators continued the separate task of identifying the victim. Her physical description, dental information, and clothing details were circulated through state and national law enforcement channels. The case was also entered into the Unidentified Missing Persons database. Missing person reports from Wisconsin and the surrounding states were also reviewed and compared against what was known about her. Multiple potential matches were evaluated and excluded. In the end, no missing person report was confirmed to correspond to the woman found on Old Line Road. Investigators were at a dead end. As is common in cases like this, where the remains offered few immediate answers, a facial reconstruction was created to give the public a face to recognize. But there was one issue. Her face and skull had been severely destroyed. Before her likeness could be created, forensic anthropologists first had to reconstruct the skull itself. There was extensive cranial collapse, multiple fractures, and missing sections. Specialists carefully examined each fragment. Thanks to some incredible people, the skull was gradually rebuilt, with collapsed areas restored to their estimated original position. This entire process was painstaking and rather critical, as any error in skull reconstruction would directly affect the accuracy of the face. Once the cranial structure was stabilized, anthropologists assessed biological indicators, and the profile was established. Once this was done, a forensic artist then created a composite image, which was then shared to the public in hopes that someone, somewhere, recognized this poor woman. But they didn't. No one came forward. With no identification forthcoming, the woman was buried in Viroqua City Cemetery under the name Vernon County Jane Doe. The burial was handled in such a way that allowed her to be dug up again if need be, just in case advances in forensic science made additional testing possible. Weeks then turned to months, and then months into years. Over the following decades, the case remained open. Evidence was preserved, and the case was sometimes reviewed by sheriffs and investigators over the years. By 2015, investigators publicly stated that they had worked through more than 4,000 leads connected to the case. During this time, this woman was only one of 2 open cold case homicide investigations in the entire county. It would be in August of 2015 that her remains were exhumed and DNA samples were obtained for specialized testing. Alongside this, a new facial reconstruction was commissioned using forensic anthropology and updated imaging techniques. The image was released to the public in late of 2015, with investigators hoping that it would trigger recognition, especially during the holidays when families tended to reconnect and talk. Also, what's quite interesting is that investigators conducted pollen analysis on the victim's clothing, and the pollen profile was described as being most consistent with regions associated with parts of Arizona or New Mexico. Based on those findings, investigators expanded outreach beyond Wisconsin and encouraged tips from the Southwest as well as the Midwest. But again, no one recognized her. There appears to be a good level of evidence to investigate, but a missing thread or silver bullet prevents cracking the case. And this vacuum left space for locals and internet sleuths to build explanations around the limited public facts. One of the most common frameworks was the outsider dump theory. In 2015, Sheriff John Spears publicly said that because the body had been dumped just off US Highway 14, it would not have been difficult to drive in from a larger metropolitan area and leave the body in rural Vernon County. The remoteness of Old Line Road functioned as concealment without the need for burial. Perhaps digging a hole would be tricky for the killer. Maybe they were older or in some way injured or disabled. The killer did not need to hide the body if the location itself would reduce the chances of the body being found. But the removal of the tags and hands meant that the perpetrator was careful about reducing the evidence against them. They must have known that Jane Doe cases are usually harder cases to crack, and they made sure of that. It gives the impression that the killer knew exactly what he or she was doing, and that they may have done it before. Or it could also mean that it was an inexperienced killer who panicked and therefore went overkill by removing the Jane Doe's hands completely. Did they travel in from an arid state? A second theory leans the opposite way and assumes local familiarity. Old Line Road was not a destination, and it's not somewhere that people usually just stumble upon. This led many people to believe that the killer was a local. Sheriff Spears described Jane Doe as one of two cold cases that he inherited when he took over the job, with the other being the 1985 death of Terry Dalloway, and he said that investigators believe that both women were killed elsewhere and then dumped in Vernon County. Terry Dalloway was a 24-year-old university student who was last seen on the 14th of February 1985. She was witnessed seen walking her dog Susie, and then she vanished. Those who knew her described her as responsible and reliable, making her sudden disappearance immediately concerning. 4 days later, on the 18th of February, a passerby made a gruesome discovery in rural Vernon County. In a roadside, someone found Terry's burning body. She had been decapitated, and the fire had been set deliberately, suggesting a serious attempt to destroy evidence. What makes this terrifying is that her head has never been recovered, not even to this day, nor was her white poodle Susie, which vanished with her. Terry's body had been transported and dumped, rather than the crime having occurred at the location where she was found, which is kind of similar to the Jane Doe. Because of the condition of her remains and the absence of her head, determining an exact cause of death proved to be difficult. For decades, the case remained unsolved, haunting Vernon County investigators for many years. It wasn't until September 2024 that authorities arrested Michael Raymond Popp, and he was charged with first-degree murder in connection with Terry's death. This case remains pending. Some have questioned whether this same individual could be connected to both crimes. Whether that connection exists has never been established publicly. The theory that most people tend to arrive to is the husband theory. The nature of the crime appears to be deeply personal, marked by an intensity that suggests familiarity rather than chance. To many, the violence implies not just motive, but resentment, possibly even hatred. Because of this, some people believe the person responsible may have been the woman's husband, or someone intimately close to her. Supporters of this theory also point to the possibility that the man involved was of a similar age, perhaps between 60 and 65, which could explain why she was dumped and not buried. It also explains why he went to great lengths to destroy her identity, as if she was identified, it would lead investigators right to him. The case of the Vernon County Jane Doe is tragic. It's sad how many people can go unidentified for decades, while families somewhere out there may still be waiting for answers. Until her name is known, this case remains unfinished, but many remain optimistic that modern-day forensic technology will one day give her name back.